Greetings everyone, this is the last video of the basic rules and procedures we're going to be making, and in this it includes rules governing part to a draft resolution, the basic rules governing part to a resolution, rules governing voting, and precedence of motions. So now understanding, as I have told you earlier, that draft resolution is the main and the most important thing not only in United Nations but also in modern United Nations. So in this video, we are basically going to be discussing that what are the basic rules that need to be governed for a draft resolution. Firstly, the rule number 32 clearly says about working papers and describes that how working papers need to be made and what are working papers. And I would describe them. So firstly, working papers are not in formal document and they don't have a format, and we can make them in any format, and they're used to discuss what we have they used to discuss that what we have discussed in the past days of debate, like we have what problems we have discussed, and and I would specifically like you to say that you should format them according to draft resolution, because they are very important when you are writing down the preambulatory clauses of the draft resolution, and you can just copy and paste from the working paper to the draft resolution. And then other than that, draft resolution is not introduced by a motion, whereas working paper is not introduced by a motion, whereas draft resolution is introduced by a motion, and it aids to the draft resolution, and it it needs the consent of chair, because without the consent of chair it is not going to be passed on, and it depends on the chair if he passes or if he wants the working papers or not. The draft solution, the rule number 33, which is a very important. It is introduced when received. It is introduced when it receives the approval of the chair. Like when the chair is going to check out the draft resolution, its formatting, its commas, which we are going to be discussing in the documentation series. We are going to be discussing about not only draft resolutions but about how to make working papers and position papers, as well as the crisis papers and Pakistan National Assembly documents. And for General Assembly, the so in the past rules of procedures and formatting, draft resolutions included what we call it as sponsors, but now in HMN 2019 rules of procedures, there are no sponsors of a draft resolution, and the minimum number of sponsors required for a draft resolution in a General Assembly are 20. In Economic and Social Council, there are 10. There is a need of 10 signatories, and in Crisis Committee, 5 signatories are needed. There's a often misconception, by the way, in our immune circuit in Pakistan, that being a signatory means that you're supporting a draft resolution, like you are a member of the bloc which has introduced this draft resolution. However, these misconceptions are incorrect, because being a signatory to a draft resolution means that you are desiring to discuss the draft resolution, to discuss its operatives, and discuss that what areas of concern it includes. And other than that, simple majority is there's a need of simple majority of people to be in the simple majority of people to be in the signatory of a draft resolution. And after it often happens in most of the modern nation conference that during the conference they finish with one topic, then and when they would introduce a draft resolution and complete with the draft resolution of first topic, then they would move towards drafting the resolution of a second topic. Rule number 34, how we introduce draft resolutions, which is very important, I believe. uh, for introducing a draft resolution, we have each motion specifically to introduce one draft resolution, and these voting are procedural votings, which would be discussed earlier in later on in this video. And the same order of voting is there's the same order of voting in which it is introduced. Like for instance, a delegate raises a motion. Like for instance, the delegate of Turkey would like to raise a motion to introduce draft resolution 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3 one after another. And in the same way, there's going to be voting of the draft resolutions. Like First they would be voting of 1.1, then they would be voting of 1.2 and 1.3. And here we are done with the introduction of draft resolution. Rule number 35, amendments, which is very important, and this is very important and interesting as well. And all right, and basically, what is the amendment? We first need to understand the term amendment. It is adding, inserting, deleting, or revising parts of a draft resolution. Like for instance, you have operative clause and you have failed to failed to format that one specific operative clause and put a full stop in it. Then you can amend it to remove it, right? And preambulatory clauses are not amended. That is very important thing to be known. And we would be discussing preambulatory clauses as well as operative clauses, their formatting and everything in the documentation videos. And before Harvard 2019 rules of procedures, when they were sponsors, they were friendly amendment. But now there is no such concept of friendly amendments, as there are no sponsors. There are always going to be unfriendly amendments, which means that a specific amendment would be raised by a delegate, and then it needs a simple majority to be passed on, which is the one which is the simple majority is half of the committee, right? Sorry, one third of the committee. Yes, one third of the committee. and and when a specific amendment is passed on, then the chair is going to select two people, the two who are within the favor and the two who are against. So, and in this way they can work on amendments, and after the amendments are done, the speakers list would be ended, and the debate would be closed. As we have mentioned earlier about the procedural voting and substantive voting in earlier on in introduction to draft resolution, also need to further discuss that what the term procedural voting and what the term substantive voting means. So procedural voting is voting on any other method in draft resolution, and it includes voting for roll call, voting for formal session, voting for unmoderated caucuses, and all those kinds of motions. And it is an important thing to remember that you cannot abstain in procedural votes. Yes, you cannot abstain in procedural votes, which means you only have to say yes or no, right? Which means yes. And in case of substantive voting, it includes voting on draft resolutions and amendments. Uh, Specifically draft resolutions and amendments. And once the committee is closed, then we are going to move towards what we call it as substantive voting. And at the time chambers are sealed, there would be no interruption. And for instance, substantive voting includes motion to divide the questions, motion to reorder draft resolution, and and such instance motion for a roll call vote. So now there's also other thing that how the draft resolutions are voted in a committee. And there's voting by unanimous consent, number one. Secondly, we have reordering draft resolutions. Thirdly, we have division of questions and roll call voting. One type of voting is also missing, which is known as placard voting, right? So what happens in unanimous voting, unanimous consent is that the chair asks that in a very loud voice that if anyone is opposing to this draft resolution, and if no one opposes this draft resolution, which means that the draft resolution is obviously passed and there's no kind of other concept. Reordering draft resolution is very particularly important if you are like willing to get your draft resolution passed. For instance, and we can take it as an example, like for instance you're going to be having three draft resolutions. Let's take an example for, just wait a second please, sorry for the interface. Like we are going to be have draft resolution 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and a draft resolution of we are going to be having three draft resolutions, right? And if you are going to be having draft resolution 1.3, you can reorder your draft resolution to be known as draft resolution 1.2. Like then your draft resolution would be draft resolution 1.1, and a draft resolution which belongs to the group block would now be draft resolution 1.3, and it can help you in gaining votes because most of the supporters of countries will think that draft resolution 1.3, which had now become draft resolution 1.1, is a draft resolution of their own block, and they would vote in favor of that draft resolution, hence increasing the chances of getting your draft resolution passed. And for the division of questions, firstly we need to understand that division of questions is only on operative clauses, right? And for that we have a specific operative clause, and we are going to vote on each operative clause. There's going to be a speech. One person would speak in favor of the favor that why should it be voted for, and one would speak that why shouldn't it be voted for. And then and then and then when and then when all these operative clauses which would be passed would be recombined with the preambulatory clauses, and then there would be again voting of the draft resolution which has been made passing after the division of questions. And since it is a very long procedure and takes a lot of time, to avoid this type of voting, we have the next voting we have is roll call voting. And according to is it firstly has the right to request a roll call vote after the draft resolution is closed. And then and then there's a motion for roll call, and then there's voting, and each country would be called by their name. And there are three things they can say. They can say present or voting, present, they can say yes, no, or abstain. And it is important thing to remember that if one country state is going to abstain, then the simple majority which is required for the draft resolution to pass would also would reduce by one. For instance, the quorum is set at 13, one delegate and if one delegate would abstain, then the quorum would be 12, and in order to get your draft resolution passed, you only need 12 votes. And in order for placard voting is by showing you placards, and if there would be the required number of placards, then the draft resolution would be passed. And the precedence of motions, we discuss about the precedence of motions. These following are the incidental motions, and they are like immediately passed, and they cannot be like overruled. First is the point of personal privilege, which we have discussed in the second video, sorry. And the point of order we have also discussed, and all types of points we have discussed. Motions should also be considered on a preference, like they should be first adjournment, suspension, unmods, mods, introduction to DRs, amendments, postponement of debate, resumption of debate, and closure of debate. So that's it from the rules of procedures. I hope you understood very well about the rules of procedures. If you have any query or any problem, please free to comment down below. Also, we are going to be hosting a session either on Zoom or coming live on Facebook, so that we can solve or resolve all of the queries you have regarding the rules of procedures. Firstly, and secondly, we are also going to be making a series on documentation, which would not on which would include but is not going to be limited to draft resolutions and position papers. And that's it for this video.